inevitable. I don't think the government should try to do too much. I believe Haibin also highlighted the fact the current government is different from the previous government, at least is trying to act differently from the previous one, trying to act, which brings the subject of today, reform and economic growth. One of the participants actually came to me during coffee break saying, is this going to be a repeat of the previous session? That would be very bad because we all have different opinions. And secondly, China is a big story. There are so many ways to present the China story. So I try to be different from Haibin. And also I would urge you maybe to raise more questions after, I would say, a shorter deliberation. But my goal is to help you think, and my goal is not to inflict on you. First of all, the current government versus previous government. If you think about the previous government being led by two gentlemen, Mr. Hu Jintao as party secretary and Mr. Wen Jiabao as prime minister, they are all in their 70s, They all studied engineering or sciences in university. The president studied in Tsinghua University hydraulic engineering. The prime minister studied mining. He was a geologist. Now, when university system was being heavily influenced by Soviet Union, and certain disciplines don't make sense to you. So, for example, Department of Automation, that's essentially electrical engineering. Department of Autos. So you spend 5 years just to study the engines of vehicles. And my department didn't make a lot of sense. My department was called National Economic Management in Peking University. I don't believe, there should be a National Economic Management. Anyway, and we actually even used textbooks from East Germany, Bulgaria, so on and so forth. So, if you look at these two leaders, they are in the 70s. They were influenced by Soviet-style education. So I would argue, fundamentally, these two gentlemen, they don't really trust market forces. In fact, the reaction by China in November 2008, this stimulus package, really highlights the fact the previous government had this fundamental disbelief towards market forces. They felt administrative measures would be more powerful. So if we spend money and collectively we get the economy going. I'm just saying that's how they think. Now, the current leaders, they are all in their late 50s, as you know. China, I would describe the political system as authoritarian. I wouldn't use the word dictatorship. We already have term limit, meaning by the 70 you must retire, after 2 terms you must leave. So they are all in their late 50s. And their normal education was being interrupted by Cultural Revolution. For example, President Xi Jinping, he didn't get into university until 1976. Now, 76, university system was still shut down because Cultural Revolution hasn't ended. So both of them have worked in countryside for a very, very long time. That's why the Prime Minister said, when was working to run this production team in rural China, People's Commune, we're just laboring ourselves throughout the year, and toward the end of the year, we didn't have enough food. So I think these two people, they do understand planned economy is quite absurd, right? Because planned economy in China has failed fundamentally. So I think that's a very important distinction. And they didn't study engineering. In fact, Prime Minister studied law at Peking University. He translated this well-known British book by scholar and on due process. So I just want to say, yeah, please.
He also has a PhD in economics.
Yes. Actually, from my advisor, Li, from Mr. Li.
Yeah, okay. From Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang.
No, that's a different one. That's a different one. Yeah, that's a different political leader, one of the 7. Thank you for the interruption. So first of all, I want to talk about reform and growth. To be very realistic, I want to present the kind of reform I want to see. Just being very realistic, we have to be realistic, right? And this is different from Europe. I mean, China is not one of the European countries being pushed by Germany, so there won't be any austerity program. And besides Chinese, I think fundamentally we believe in Chinese medicine, not Western medicine. So I think that's important. So which means reforms I really want to see will be the following. First of all, no fiscal stimulus. No fiscal stimulus. I mean, that's something so to what extent the current government is tolerating slow growth rate, that's an extremely important text. That's one. Secondly, as you have heard about the decisive role to be played by market forces, what does that mean? I think we want to see corporate failures. We need to accept the failures. We need to accept bankruptcies. Not just corporations, also non-banking financial institutions. I think that's another very important indicator. Very important. What about the third indicator? The third indicator is the Prime Minister Li Keqiang. He said this publicly. This is actually very much linked to this section. This section is reform, economic growth, and regulation. He said, I want to do something to reduce government red tape. He said, in my first term, I would like to get rid of 1/3 of government approvals. There's a long list of government approvals. I think it's like, he has identified like 1,600. So he said, essentially he said, in the first 5 years, I would like to get rid of between 500 to 550. And we have seen the reduction of 300 so far. I think that's very, very important, right? Very important. So, which brings on to the next issue, the trade-off between economic growth and reform. Haibin has presented this view. 7.5% is going to be very challenging. I think one of the audience was asking whether China could achieve 6% in the long run. Maybe in the super long run, China will be just like the rest of the world, growing at 2 to 3%. Okay, so why there is a trade-off between economic growth and reform? If you recall, actually, Haibin has used a chart on so-called total social financing. Total social financing is a very broad measure of credit. It's bank credit, it's capital market activity, but as you know, our equity market has been shut down for quite some time, and including bond market, which is still very small, and of course, shadow banking and direct lending. So that's total social financing. If you recall that chart, and I think the message, I would say, is very clear. Credit is having a diminishing rate of return on GDP growth, economic growth. So in other words, we can achieve 7.5%, we can achieve 8%, we can even achieve 10%, but at what cost? The cost is higher inflation. Is that something you are prepared to accept? I would argue socially and politically, you don't want to accept that. And I think if you recall, Haibin also talked about the importance of anti-corruption campaign, right? I mean, higher inflation will worsen income disparity. I don't need to explain that. So first of all, if we go for a higher growth rate, there is a price to be paid. Secondly, the past history didn't matter because we made a big mistake in 2008. This is stimulus package, so-called 4 trillion RMB stimulus package. But real stimulus package was more than 3 times of that. And we are left with a lot of side effects. I don't want to bore you, but just list what are the side effects. One side effect is we have much worsening overcapacity. By the way, I do represent ArcelorMittal as an independent director in China. I want to tell you the horror story of a steel industry, so overcapacity. Secondly, worsening asset quality. I think Haibin has talked about that, worsening asset quality, shadow banking, local government debt. And thirdly, the side effect is local government. Many local government are running out of money, and that's why the government recently came up with new measures to relax municipal government bond issuance. So we have many side effects, and some of this side effect will be with us, for quite some time. So that's why we have this. And thirdly, why 7.5%? Why not 7.4%? Why not 7.3%? Why 7%? Right. So the government has said this should be around 7.5%. So what the government was saying was, we will accept the growth rate, which was slightly lower than 7.5%. But even the prime minister, who is an extremely enlightened person, he has refused to spell out the floor of growth rate. So let's look at why 7.5%. Well, I believe government is being misled by some other economists. They felt there is always this trade-off between GDP growth and unemployment rate or job creation. I mean, if you study economic literature, well, the former Yale professor Okun actually has studied this relationship in the United States. That's called Okun's law. So inverse relationship between GDP growth and unemployment rate. So in China, there used to be the case, but today, I would argue with labor shortage and a double-digit wage rate growth of blue-collar workers, this relationship is no longer holds true. But then people would ask us, what about university students? That's actually a very big headache. I think one of the audience was asking, really this potential market for China. Well, this number is very important. Chinese university system is huge, and each year we churn out 7.3 million graduates. So they need jobs, 7.3, right? And because urbanization, migrant workers, many of them stay in cities, that's roughly 10 million, and plus, of course, birth rate and a new. So each year the government wants to create 21 million jobs. As you can see, that's a very big target. But if you ask most university graduates, most of them, they don't want to be blue-collar workers. They want to do sales, they want to get new services. So what I'm saying is, even you try to achieve 7.5% growth rate or even 8% growth rate, a lot of these jobs being created in manufacturing, and universities say they don't want to take anyway. So I think we should be very honest about this 7.5% growth rate, and I think eventually the government will give up this target, that's growth rate. On reform pecking order, I believe the lady from Australian Embassy has presented this quite long list. Now, if I look at China's economy through the eyes of economists, this is how I see reform to be played out. I mean, if you think about planned economy, land price was underpriced, cost of capital was underpriced, cost of pollution was very cheap. So what we are saying is factor prices in China have been very low. So going forward, what China is trying to do, this is being presented in China 2020, China 2030, is to normalize those prices, meaning what? Meaning land privatization, energy price reform, and cost of pollution will be changed. It's already happening, and also meaning interest rate deregulation, flexible exchange rate, capital account opening, so on and so forth. But as you know, the success of China's economic reform so far is not to fight all the battles at the same time, because that's not politically feasible. So the question is, what is the area previously being considered as politically challenging? Now it's actually a politically low-hanging fruit. I would argue that's use of financial liberalization. Why? Well, we have the high highest saving rate, we have the most liquid banks in the world, and we have the most frugal consumers. But at the same time, we don't have equity market. Equity market is not functioning, and our best companies, they have to be listed in the United States or other exchanges. I mean, that's reality. And from time to time, if you look at interbank market, we have this quite vicious attack, meaning interbank rate overshooting on the upside from time to time. This is not normal. Clearly, this is telling us financial market is really, really not functioning. And I think if you listen to Haibin's speech, and local government, they need to lose weight. They need to go to gyms. State-owned enterprises, they need to go gym. They need to lose weight. So what I mean? So that means the consumers and private companies, they need to get more funding from capital market. So I think this is so I think this is indeed happening, which brings the next issue. What are the challenges? I think I will present a few challenges. Then maybe Tim, we can just have a discussion. The first challenge is, as you know, normally reforms are taking place when you have a crisis. But if you listen to Haibin's speech, where's the crisis? Because China doesn't owe foreigners money. Foreigners owe China money. China is the second largest creditor after Japan. I mean, in the end, we owe ourselves money. So there, I mean, it's very, very unlikely for China to see this margin call. Secondly, if you look at real estate market prices clearly are very high. But at the same time, I don't think we are going to have a massive correction on the downside. I mean, a lot of people are still prepared to buy. So what's the trigger? So if there's no crisis, then what's the trigger? So I think that's the first challenge. The second challenge is the challenge secondly is external constraints. Now, if you think about when China opened up in 1979, China basically had no foreign trade and foreign reserves pretty much at zero. Today, China is the largest trading nation in the world. China's market share, goods and services in developed world, I would say Australia, New Zealand, North America, Western Europe, Japan, is over 20%. So China is so global today. And that's also presenting a problem because in the past, when we had difficulties domestically, we assume external demand will bail us out. But that's not going to happen anymore. Again, I have to say, if you look at the steel sector, if China doesn't make money, no one will make money because simply we are too big. So that's presenting a constraint for China, external constraint. The other external constraint was when China was opening up, China was small. So that's why in 1994, China massively devalued the currency, and no one really cared. I mean, today, China didn't even devalue the currency. I mean, we simply changed this one-way appreciation with 2 to 3% adjustment, and everyone is complaining. So by the way, I would argue, I mean, if China is really being selfish, China should just devalue the currency by 10%, one-off adjustment, because the risk for China to do so is actually very small. I mean, I'm sure you agree, economy is slowing, so there's no threat of inflation. At the same time, if you look at Chinese corporate, external debt taken by Chinese corporate divided by GDP, that ratio is so low, only 16%. So there's no risk for China to do that, but China simply cannot do that because right.
Foreign governments would.
Exactly. And also, of course, we Chinese, we think face is very important. So that's another constraint. That's also a challenge. The other challenge, I think, for reform is, in order for reform to be implemented, you actually need those economic actors, agencies to carry them out. And I would argue many of them, by doing so, it's against their fundamental interest. So for example, National Reform and Development Commission, and also all the regulators. So I think that's another challenge we should not discount. But finally, I just want to make some remark. I think we should have a conversation. Is I think in the end, if you look at the changes China has gone through since 1977, I would argue, in the end, Chinese government is more flexible than most people have anticipated. The system is more flexible than most people have anticipated. And I would also argue China simply has some policy leeway, and many countries don't have. To give you an example, if you want to buy an apartment in Shanghai, first of all, you're not allowed to buy if you already have one apartment. Now, if you don't have one, initial down payment is 40 to 50%. That's very, very high. And so I'm just saying, there's room for China to reflect the economy, and China has a policy leeway, and inflation is not a threat at this point. But Tim, maybe I should just stop here, and I think we should take questions either from you or from the audience. Yeah.
We might do a little bit, but I thought,
Yeah.